time is really strange in a nursing home. People are motivated by the meal times. The newspaper delivery is listed as an activity at the place. They're just mundane activities in my life or your life. They become these big events at these nursing homes. I think when you're there and you're witnessing that and you're well, it's really hard to watch and to kind of do time the way that they're doing time.
Deborah Cohan knows there's nothing easy about caregiving for a dying parent. She watched over her father as he spent the last few years of his life in a nursing home. Witnessing a parent's decline into dementia is hard enough, but Deborah's situation was especially complicated because it happened after she endured years of emotional and verbal abuse from her father. What's it like to want abuse to stop, but a relationship to continue? Is it possible to forgive someone who can't even remember what they did? Deborah's answers to these questions might surprise you. She draws on her expertise as a sociologist and a domestic abuse counselor to make sense of her own life after her father's death. Her book is called Welcome to Wherever We Are, a memoir of family, caregiving, and redemption. Deborah joins us to talk about it right now. I'm journalist Blair Hodges, and this is Relationscapes. We're mapping the stories and ideas that shape who we are and how we connect with each other so we can build a more just world together. Deborah J. Cohan, welcome to Relationscapes.
Thank you so much for having me, Blair. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. And Deborah, there are a lot of books out there about caregiving for aging parents. There are also a lot of books out there about what it's like to witness and experience abuse in families, but there aren't a whole lot of books that are about both of those things in the same book. You've written a book here about what it means to care for an aging and ill parent who also happens to have been an abuser. That's how you introduce it. Talk about the decision to write a book like that. It's a unique book.
Thanks for noticing that. I guess sometimes we write the books that we wish existed so that we could have them as our own guide. And it seems that, as an expert in domestic violence and also as someone who's studied the sociology of families, it made perfect sense for me to create this kind of what I'd call a braided memoir. These two stories are very much interlocking in the book. And I think in many people's lives, even if there's not actual abuse in someone's family, there's so much relatable stuff in the book because of the different complicated dynamics that we all find ourselves in just by living in our families. Most families have some complicated dynamics of some sort. And so I was really trying to help others to think about that and to think about how these two things that are happening in the culture are really often happening at the same time, which is the complicated family piece and also the fact that more and more people are involved in some amount of caregiving. And it tends to be gendered, where women tend to be doing it more. You're
a specialist who studied family violence as well. You say that family violence is a dynamic process. It's not an event or an isolated set of events. It's an environment. And you say it unfolds and takes different shapes, often over years of time. And now, in your own personal experience, you've come to see how it can be lodged in caregiving. Talk a little bit about that.
A lot of times when domestic violence is talked about, especially in the media, we hear about it as an episode, or we hear about it as an incident, sort of an isolated event. And what I learned through working with violent men for so many years at the oldest battering intervention program in the country, which is Emerge in Boston, and also working with survivors, is that these things that are referred to as incidents or events or episodes, they are connected experiences. And it's it usually escalates over time if practitioners and advocates and others in the field, and even just people's friends, can help people to see the connection and sort of to help them connect the dots between this episode and then this one. And because, I talk about there's connective tissue, if you will. For example, most abusers don't start being abusive by punching someone or strangling them or any of those sorts of things. These things start out in lots of other ways. They get accentuated through time. And so I think it's just really important to see that this stuff isn't just, it's not a one-time thing. These things build on each other.
Maybe take a minute or two really quickly here to just give us the broad strokes of your family. Who is this book about? Where are you from?
Currently, I live in South Carolina, but I was born and raised in Cleveland, in a pretty storied suburb, actually. Lots of books.
This is Shaker Heights.
Yes. Lots of books and magazines and all articles and all sorts of stuff on it. It's an interesting and complex place. I think people who don't live there think of it as this sort of gilded kind of community, upper middle class, etc. But lots of other things are happening there, as they are everywhere. But the one interesting thing is that, you know, when you grow up in a community where there is an amount of privilege and there are resources and things like family violence do become even more secretive. And so, you know, it's not until I really published the book that then I found even high school friends and acquaintances coming out, reaching out, telling me, oh my gosh, I experienced the same thing. Or I had no idea you were going through that in high school. So was I. People are left feeling even more alone in a situation like that. So, as I say, I was born in Cleveland and I was raised as an only child, which is a very big piece of this book because of the ways in which that's kind of complicates things, especially because my parents had also divorced very soon before my dad got sick. And then I really wound up as his main person, you know, his caregiver. Mm-hmm. And my dad was someone who was really adoring. He was an amazing, amazing dad in many ways. Actually, you know, I miss and love him every day. And he died 11 years ago this month, actually. But he was also abusive. And so, I mean, that's something we can talk about later on, but that's a really big issue to me, is that for people to understand the multidimensionality of the abuser and the fact that by all accounts, I guess, you know, people would say, I grew up in a loving home. I grew up, you know, getting to do a lot of cool things with my parents. My parents they were very successful, you know, all this kind of stuff. But there was also this other side behind closed doors that was, and not always behind closed doors, because my dad also was an expert at public humiliation and stuff. So it was a lot to manage. My parents also, and I think this is really interesting in terms of some of the demographic issues and stuff, is that, so my dad had me when he was 42 years old, and my mom was about to be 35. So in 1969, though, those were really older parents. You know, most of my friends, their parents were much, much younger. So that meant that when all of this started with my dad being sick, I was catapulted into caregiving at a time where my friends' parents, you know, were playing tennis and golf and retiring and doing other cool things like traveling and stuff. And so there again, I was sort of alone in this kind of a process. It's like they married late because it was a second marriage. They had me later. They got divorced very late in life. They were almost 65 and 72. All of these dynamics, all of these demographic trends, if you will, it's actually funny how the book stands at the intersection of all of these trends. And when we're seeing them more and more, we're seeing people having kids later. We're seeing people divorcing later. We're seeing people living longer.
That's right. And adult kids caregiving for their parents or parent. Yeah. Right.
I mean, often while caring for their own children. And then and then the other thing that I talk about is the living apart together, where I'm partnered with someone where we don't live together. You know, my husband lives 2 hours away. So I guess when I wrote the book, I didn't think about all the ways in which my life is sitting at these intersections of demographic shifts and trends and stuff. But it is. And I think that some of those are really important to the way that the book unfolds and to the way that I think about all this stuff.
Yeah, you do sit at intersections of a lot of things. Just to flesh it out a little bit more, too, I'll mention that, as you said, your family was upper middle class there in Shaker Heights. You say that you were Jewish identified, but your family wasn't affiliated or practicing. Your parents were politically progressive. Your mom was artistic, an abstract artist. Your father worked in advertising, and he wrote the Hawaiian Punch song. Is this true?
The line, how'd you like a nice Hawaiian punch?
Yeah.
Isn't that he's just wild?
Yeah. That really caught me off guard. And your parents were also married and divorced before they got married. So your father had two children that you never got to know, just from like this different phase of his life. So that also kind of fills out this background. If you have a copy of the book there, I thought it would actually be nice to hear you read from the introduction there. Actually, the first page gives us a really good picture of what's to come. Can you read that for us?
Sure. When I first set out to write about my dad, I thought my book would only be filled with stories of his abuse, his rage, my own resulting rage and grief, and maybe even his grief as well. However, the writing process revealed other emotions, things that surprised me, disgusted me, delighted me, and saddened me. At moments, I was glad to be reminded of all the love I still feel for my father and reassured of his love for me. I've anguished over whether in my promise to tell about my father's abuse with integrity and honesty, the story would somehow be diminished by this other story of the great love we shared. It's only now that I see that the once seemingly pure story of his abuse is not even a pure story. And interestingly, I don't think the abuse is even the grittiest or rawest part of the story. As it turns out, the story would be easier to tell if all I needed to do was report about all the times that my dad behaved badly. You might get angry with him, and you might even feel sorry for me. But that's not what I wanted out of this book. You need to also know and feel the love we shared, the way I felt it, and I still do. The much harder story to tell is the one that unfolds in these pages. It's the story of ambivalence, of what it means to stand on a precipice of both love and fear, and what it means to navigate between forgiveness and blame, care and disregard, and resilience and despair.
Thank you. A couple of things come to mind as I'm reading that. First of all, I wondered if you were presenting yourself as an exemplary type of person who'd experienced abuse. And as it turns out throughout the book, you don't. You don't set yourself forward as everyone should kind of process abuse the way I did. You don't expect people who have been abused to be forgiving or to like seek all of that. So I want to let people know that right off the top. But I did want to kind of talk about Kate Mann's idea of himpathy, because that's what came to mind here at the opening of your book before I knew what was coming. Himpathy is this idea of extending sympathy to men who are doing crappy stuff, basically. The guy is the problem, but we tend to sort of side with the guy or try to like get inside his heart or his head and like extend sympathy to someone who's done terrible things. And you have a background of working with these domestic violence survivors and perpetrators. So I just wondered your thoughts about that idea of himpathy and how you negotiated with that as you think about your own relationship with your dad and as you were writing this book.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I have not heard of that word or that theory. And that would be interesting to read more about. I certainly did, worry about that a bit. Here I am, trained in feminist sociology and I've done all this work. And it's almost like that didn't want to let people down or something, or didn't want to seem like I was giving him a pass, so to speak.
Right.
I guess I also had to just write it in that authentic way that I feel I did, and just realize that I think the much more nuanced approach is actually the approach I took, which is that, no one is purely one thing or another. Neither am I. I mean, I come out as pretty flawed in the book too, which I'm glad about because, it's like the no one's perfect thing. Yeah. I mean, I think there are certainly people who might read the book who might say, oh my gosh, like I would never still love my dad, or I would have stopped talking to him, or kind of like F you kind of stuff. And I don't know. To me, it was just, that would be too easy. I think the harder piece is to deal with that ambivalence. And it's, as you say, it's not right for everyone. And it's totally dependent on different people's situations. But I also think for some people, it's like some readers have told me it's very valuable to have gotten to juggle both, so that they can see how to juggle both themselves. I mean, and it's not really that rare that someone who's been hurt by someone still wants a relationship with them. I mean, I guess the real essence of dealing with an abusive relationship is that you want the abuse to stop, but you want the relationship to continue.
You love the person.
Yeah. I mean, we see that with sexual abuse survivors a lot. There's a lot of research on that. So it's complicated. It makes me want to read about this. That's empathy.
Yeah, look up himpathy. It's this sympathy for men, basically. And
she's critical of it, obviously.
She's critical, but it's very thoughtful. It actually, I think, it resonates well with what you present in your book, which is you're not You're not giving your dad a pass or excusing his behavior. You're just also recognizing the ways that you loved him and why. That's different than saying, you know what, actually the abuse was okay. Or even like the abuse was maybe beneficial or maybe deserved, or that all of your attention would be focused on protecting your father's reputation rather than talking about what the relationship really was and processing your feelings for other people to kind of witness and maybe go alongside with you. So yeah, I think it's helpful. Yeah. If
I grew up in the home that my dad grew up in, maybe I wouldn't have done anything different either. So it's a really hard truths to reconcile, but I think they're really important.
I think it's important to think about individual responsibility, but also context. Sometimes it's easier to offload our anxiety that stuff like this happens by just demonizing an individual person. And I'm a strong proponent of justice and of attending to the person who's been abused first and foremost. I think their experience really needs to be attended to. I think that if we just demonize an individual person, it excuses the ways that we participate in a society that can facilitate stuff like that, basically.
Exactly.
They're really bad. I can kind of overlook the crappy ways I treat people because here are these evil enemies over here that I can identify as the bad people and not think about the ways that I might be implicated. So it's complicated, though. It's complicated. And
right.
Let's talk about some abuse examples from your father. You say he was really financially generous, but he was also really financially controlling. And you've seen this dynamic in other families. And there comes this moment early on where he makes this comment to you. He says, you know, you'd make my life a lot easier if you just commit suicide. And it seems like he wasn't saying that like as a joke. Like it comes across as though he just said this to you as a matter of fact.
Yeah. You know, that was in the context of something that was financially abusive and controlling. But it's so interesting to hear that comment restated to me. And I've heard it so many times since the book came out. It was even really startling the first time I saw it on the jacket of the book, and then it's on Amazon. And, you know, it's like people glom onto it because it's so over the top for a parent to say that to a kid, or in this case, a young adult woman, because I was in my 20s. I think that's the comment that makes people say, oh, I could never have cared for him. I could have never had a relationship with him. There is just something really kind of odd about hearing it back and realizing that in a way at the time it was really, really upsetting, but it almost, I guess, like so many other acts of abuse, things get kind of minimized or forgotten or denied. Or it's really interesting to think of like probably how soon after I still was able to talk to him or willing to engage with him, that sort of thing. So, and at the same time, I wouldn't really tolerate that. It's just one of those things where, yeah, it's hard. It's very hard to describe how I know that comment is so searing to readers and to just anybody hearing it. And it's just so disturbing. And at the same time, it's such a good example, though, of how his feelings were sort of the priority, as is true in abusive relationships, where it's like the abuser is so focused on their feelings and the other person's actions. And it was such a prime example of where he completely distorted what I was saying and where I was trying to do something that could be helpful to find out something about insurance, and his financial contribution was stuff. And he just really just jumped into me verbally with this kind of accusation and assuming the worst of me. So in a sense, I think what I would want people hearing this to understand is not just the intensity of what he said, but how it encapsulates so many different pieces related to abuse, like the threats, the focus on his feelings and my behavior, you know, just all this. I mean, the assuming the worst of me is really the key piece of this.
And this is really the kind of abuse that you experience, this sort of verbal assault. And I mean, you even say like your father never actually hit you, so physical abuse, but you did always have the perception that he could. Like there was always a sense that he might. And you say that was its own sort of terror that can give a person trauma. Oh,
for sure. Because somebody who says something that vicious and cruel and brutal, like, you know, my life would be easier if you commit suicide. I mean, it is a slap in the face. It is a punch in the gut. It is all of those things kind of metaphorically. And so I mean, this is why I think it's so crucial. And I always try to encourage like my students, and I talked about this with violent offenders, is to not create a hierarchy of like what sort of abuse is worse than another. Because, right, it's true. He did not pull my hair or spit on me or punch me or throw me against a wall or strangle me or any of these awful things that happen. But the threat of violence, the constant berating, the criticizing, the defining reality, when someone says something like that to you, what are you supposed to say? I mean, there's no way to respond. So it was like his ability to try to exert that level of power and control and that level of silencing me and like kind of putting me in my place in this way. Those are some of the core defining features of abuse.
I learned a lot more about abuse and seeing these patterns of abuse. For example, you talk about how maybe you would be together during a trip, right? And he would freak out. He would scream and swear at you publicly. So not only did it hurt you because your dad's treating that way, but also it's embarrassing and other people are witnessing this, which compounds the hurt. And this would happen during a trip where he was visiting. And then at the end of the trip, you say he had this tactic of minimizing and mutualizing. So he would talk about the tactic, what that looks like to minimize and mutualize after an assault like that.
Yeah, it's like the comments, like it's not so bad, or didn't we have a fun time, or glomming on to the parts that were fun. Like, wasn't that wonderful when we saw The Lion King, or wasn't that amazing when we ate at this restaurant? And sort of by highlighting the goodies, it forced me in a set, again, it's part of his defining reality, but then it kind of made me have to think, oh yeah, that stuff was really nice. That was really good. So maybe that's not so bad. The other stuff.
And it doesn't feel like he was really asking either, right? It seems like what's happening here is control. He needs to control the story. And so he's not really looking for your input about how you felt about everything, but really telling you, by the way, this trip was awesome. You better think that it was. And if you don't, then there's a problem with you.
Well, and not just that there's a problem with you, but also that you're insatiable and that you
deserve my yelling and stuff. Maybe.
Or nothing I do for you is ever good enough. Then it turns into like, I'm not grateful enough. And which was a huge part of the narrative.
And as we said before, like, this isn't a book of forgiveness for your father. You do repeatedly express your love for him and describe to the reader where that love comes from and what it looks like. But you're saying that there's a sense in which you want some redemption for that relationship, but not necessarily forgiveness. And that was an interesting distinction that I'd never really thought about before. So talk about how you see those two things of like seeking some kind of redemption versus like just forgiveness.
I love that question because so often people still conclude that I've totally forgiven him and then decide, oh, I'm not sure I could forgive him. It's like the reader's voice. Mm-hmm. Like I talk about in the book, forgiveness is a bit overrated. As someone who does not identify religiously, forgiveness feels far too rooted in notions of religion, so that I'm not totally comfortable with that. I mean, I think the redemption is more that now I'm 53 years old. I understand that people like my parents did the best they could with what they had at the time they did it. So there's a part of me that just kind of, I have more sort of acceptance of the multidimensionality of my parents in a way. And I think their deaths, because my mom has died also, their deaths helped to do that, even though that was something I dreaded for so long. But then it turns out that there's something about it that, that now I can see the full humanity of both of them in a way that maybe was harder to see when they were alive. And, the other piece of the forgiveness thing is that in working with abusers, I remember working with a counselor. We were co-facilitating a group one evening, and he was really pushing this abuser on really holding him accountable. And he kept saying to him, like, what are you sorry for? Like, who are you sorry for? And it was like, who are the tears for? And really trying to get this guy to see that he still didn't really see him like he was, apologetic, really, truly remorseful, that it was more about his own saving face. And so I guess the reason full forgiveness still feels really hard for me is that my dad and I never really had that full, totally open, me totally exposing all of my thoughts on this kind of conversation, maybe over a period of months and years. where I could really come to that, or where he really asked for it in a way that I could give that to him. So I feel like the most we can do here is redemption.
How do you define that then? Like, what is that redemption?
I feel like it's that maybe that acceptance of all that imperfection and all the flaw and all the limitations and things, and that there are still these redeeming aspects of him as a man in the world, of him as a father, of him in my life. I mean, I guess I couldn't have the level of loving and missing him every day without that level of some redemption. I mean, and then some people have asked me, well, it does sound like you forgive him, though. Like, it's almost like people just want to use that word so much that it's like...
yeah, I feel tempted to that question, too.
It's like,
I wanted to say it's sort of a brand or a genre of forgiveness or something.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, right. And it's so interesting, though. I was friends with a couple. The woman has died, and the man is much, much older. He's probably in his 90s now. Their daughter was murdered by their son-in-law. And they were often asked, because I had them speak at my classes, and they were often asked, do you forgive the son-in-law? And Shirley, the mother, would always say, no, and he never did anything to ask for it. He really never apologized. There was no authentic anything that would have warranted it, and that he never really accepted enough responsibility for forgiveness to be possible. And so I guess I'm still kind of at that piece.
That's a forgiveness that seems like it has to be mutual, that there has to be some, like the other person who hurt you needs to get inside your story, show that they understand it, and make some kind of reparation or connection there. And for that kind of forgiveness to happen, yeah, you have to have the other. I think what people might be thinking when they suggest to you that you have forgiven is the sense that, like, you still find good in your dad. You love him, but there's also, as you say, there's always that disconnect that's a result of the years of abuse that you can't fully reconcile, because reconciliation requires both people to be involved with it. And so it's just not possible. Like, that kind of forgiveness has to be mutual. The other person has to be involved for that forgiveness to even work, I guess.
Yeah, that it's more of it's a process. It's like the abuse is not just an episode or an instance of
a moment.
Yeah,
right.
That it's much larger. And one of the things that's difficult is that my dad seemed to have, in certain ways, he softened and almost showed me the possibilities of redemption once he was quite ill, once he was very needy and dependent. He was in, a nursing home. And then that's when, towards the end of the book, he's telling me about his experience growing up and his father being abusive to his mother and witnessing it and thinking it was just an outrageous thing. And his empathy went to his mother as a child. And yet he still reproduced this as an adult. And so, but here was a man with dementia, and he was like totally immobile and, and by then incontinent and all these other things. And it was just like, that wasn't the time to start, digging into our relationship. But had he told me all that, and had we been able to have that conversation when he was well, I don't even know if that would have been possible. Had that happened, and had he been able to show me more, like, really the actions speak louder than words, really show me in a consistent, meaningful, trustworthy way, Deb, I can't believe I did that to you. And like sort of really showing me through living out life with me that he would never do it again. But we never got there.
And it was 8 years 13 years before he died, you say. Eight of those years he was very sick in these care facilities. And you say you were lodged in a really uncomfortably intimate relationship with him, as you mentioned, because you were an adult child of divorce. So the family dynamic that you grew up with was one where you sort of trended toward like being closer to your dad. I think there was probably a protective element to that. Your mom felt sort of sidelined. And so you really paint a compelling picture of why the divorce happened later on, the way that your mom was sort of sidelined, the way that your family was this triangle that you felt pressure to make feel whole, which is something no child should have to reckon with. But then later on, when they get this divorce, here's a quote from you. You say, "During the years I cared for my dad, my mom's absence felt like a death." And I realized Deborah, how hard that must have been to basically be the only one who could really care for your dad during those 8 years because your mom was gone. You're an only child of these divorced parents.
Yeah, and she often would say to me, she kind of would accuse me of being angry at her for leaving. And sometimes she would say that somehow that I thought it was her responsibility to stay, or, she could tell that it was really hard for me. And so in a certain way, though, she was very compassionate at times about what I was dealt with in those moments. And then there were other times in which she, as I say, kind of, just almost like accused me of being angry about it. Which is a whole other piece.
Was that like a they protest too much kind of thing? Like, it seems like you were in some senses abandoned to care for him. Like, I'm not suggesting that like your mom shouldn't have gotten a divorce or anything, but their child is involved. So like you were kind of stuck with handling that. And it seems like a lot for a child in a family, even though you're a grown up at this point, to manage by yourself. I wonder if she worried if you resented it. It seems like...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she didn't just worry about it. She accused me of it.
Right, exactly, right.
And then it was a little confusing because...
But did you feel that resentment? Was her charge valid?
That's a really good question because I teach this book now in my class. And it's very interesting how I ask my students, like, if they find my mom to be a kind of a sympathetic character. The reality is that I guess she is and she isn't. There are a lot of people who come to the conclusion a little bit that what you were just alluding to of, well, I should not have been left like this. My mom, it's kind of like my mom did something wrong, that I got stuck with all of this. And what's interesting is, well, okay, so the book came out in 2020. My mom died a few months later. And here I am teaching the book. So I can't have this conversation with my mother, which I would really like to have, which is, oh my gosh, if only you could hear all the ways in which I stand up for you. You know what I mean? It's like, I constantly am saying to students, no, I don't blame my mom for leaving. In some ways, I just kind of wish she had left sooner so that they could have each had like just their new lease on life. To me, it just feels very sad that she did this at close to 65 and that he was 72. I'm not sure what else could have been done, though. I wouldn't expect people to stay in a marriage that isn't good or healthy for them. So I just can't fault my mom for leaving. It's more I wish that she had been able to do it earlier. And I know that I was probably part of the reason she didn't, which is a hard thing to deal with at the same time.
Would you resist it if I said something like, I wish that your mom had tried and pitched in a little bit to take some of the pressure off you?
No, I think that's true. I mean, she did in certain ways, but she couldn't in other ways. It's like from a legal standpoint, all these like financial stuff, everything. I mean, she was certainly financially generous in her own way and like later and about other stuff. It might have been helpful had she just said, gosh, I see you're going to Cleveland again. Like, I wasn't taking trips and doing really great stuff. I was,
Right.
was going to Cleveland many times from Boston as I was in graduate school, as I was, adjuncting and teaching in different places and commuting to Connecticut. And I wish in those moments, instead of just like taking me out to dinner or because she was living on Cape Cod by then, so we were living much closer together. Yeah, I mean, it might have been nice if she had just said, I'll buy the airline ticket or I'll let me make the reservation for you at the hotel or whatever it was. I mean, that might have lessened the burden, although she did in other ways because then she might have helped fund something else that I did need. So, it was just a very difficult time.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah.
I didn't have hard feelings towards your mom. I just wondered a little bit more about, I think, as you said, your mom was still alive when you're finishing this. It makes sense that some of that stuff just couldn't have been processed yet. And so that's helpful. I think people that pick up a copy of the book and check it out that's a really great supplement to it. I'm glad to hear you can talk to people about that as you teach the book too. The book that we're talking about, by the way, again, is called Welcome to Wherever We Are, a memoir of family, caregiving, and redemption. It's written by Deborah J. Cohan, who is professor of sociology at the University of South Carolina-Beaufort. You mentioned this a minute ago, finances. I mean, you basically witnessed your father's finances completely collapse. This is something that a lot of people are experiencing and will probably be experienced more and more because the social safety net in the United States is not great. But he went from a sharp dressing, fancy food enjoying ad executive to this man in filthy sweatpants sitting in this dilapidated care facility living on Medicaid. And he ended up dying with about $50 to his name. So you witnessed over the time he was there his complete impoverishment.
Yeah. And also I think that's some of the redemption for him too, is just knowing that I know that if he was aware of what was left at the end and what happened, I mean, his dream would have been to leave me with more, to pay off my student loan debt, all that kind of stuff. I think, he would have been ashamed and humiliated. And, in many of the ways that breadwinning and masculinity are so entangled with each other.
Oh, that reminds me. There's an excerpt that I thought you might read on page 27. You actually take us to the nursing home with some stories about what it was like when you visited him there. On page 27, yeah, it's that middle paragraph there. Yeah, if you could read that excerpt, it's basically a list, but wow, it certainly evokes experiences that I've had as well.
The nursing home, paved driveway, automatic doors, cigarette butts, patients waiting for the next distribution of cigarettes, orange sherbet and ginger ale and Salisbury steak, sticky floors, dusty rose vinyl recliners, bedpans, bingo and sing-alongs, stashes of adult diapers in the closets and drawers, motorized wheelchairs, schedules, forms, nursing aides and personal attendants, styrofoam cups, stale urine, plastic water pitchers and bendable straws, hospital beds, dark, dingy rooms, a small rod for hanging clothes, non-skid socks, no privacy, open, unlocked rooms filled with demented wanderers, whiteboards with washable markers stating the day of the week and the nurse on duty, dead plants, almost dead people, harsh overhead lighting in overheated rooms, not enough real light, tables that roll across beds for getting fed, call bells and strings to pull in the bathroom, air that doesn't move.
The stories you tell there, Deborah, visiting there seemed really hard for you, let alone what it must have been like to live there. But you felt such ambivalence about it because you say you almost couldn't stand being there at the moment, but you also would get really distraught about leaving there. Absolutely.
Yes. And thanks for having me read that piece, by the way, because it's been so long since I've actually read it. And it takes me back to the room also.
Mm-hmm. This great ambivalence.
Yeah, the ambivalence showed up in so many different ways. I think that's so true of people who are visiting people who are frail and dying or very ill. This sense of, you want to go. Like I would be in Boston. I would want to go so badly. I would want to see him. I would want to give him a big hug. I would want to finally bring him food that he craved or food that was like a special treat instead of some of the things that I listed in that piece. Then I would get there and it was like, oh gosh, I just wanted to flee. And it was like, I walked in and it was just the chaos and the bureaucracy and just the antiseptic, but actually filthy quality of these places that I illuminate in that piece. And then it was that the guilt was totally seeped in that moment. Cause then it was like, wait, I got here. I'm here. I'm supposed to want to be with him. I'm supposed to want to stay. And now I'm like counting down the time, like, It's sort of like, oh my gosh, I've been here 20 minutes. It feels like 4 hours. And then when I'd leave, it was almost like that. Oh, but I spent 3 hours, like almost like I did good time or something. And
a Herculean effort just to get through the 3 hours.
Well, yeah. And time is really strange in a nursing home also, as it is in a hospital. People they're motivated by the meal times. The newspaper delivery is listed as an activity at the place. I mean, these things that are just they're just mundane activities in my life or your life. They become these like big events at these nursing homes, I think, in ways that when you're there and you're witnessing that and you're well, it's really hard to watch and to kind of do time the way that they're doing time.
And on a bigger scale, too, the cycle that would happen. So you talk about how there would be like a medical crisis, things would seem really bad, but then he would kind of rally, show some resilience, kind of recover for a bit. You'd get a little bit of hope, and then it would crash again. And this cycle kept happening. It reminds me of this paragraph that I highlighted here. You say, perhaps many adult children caring for dying parents deal with this dilemma. How much to let the parent in? How much to keep the parent at bay? It's hard to get that close to almost death, to anticipatory grief. And when an abusive history is part of it, that push-pull with how to have healthy emotional closeness and distance becomes that much more intensified. So you're talking about the already complicated dynamics, and then you add the layer of abuse into it, which makes it all the more complicated.
I appreciate you did such a close, good reading of it, because I don't know that everybody picks up some of the pieces and the nuances, and especially the contradictory realities that are present. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate that in what you've read and shared and asked and are revealing to the audience. That's just the hardest part of all is reconciling those pieces. I spent most of my childhood really worried that my parents would die or that my parents would get divorced. And as an only child, those two things felt incredibly scary, that I would lose one or both of them or that they would get divorced. It kind of haunted me up until they died, really. And my dad, he had, like any one of the things that he suffered from, people die from pretty easily. Like, he had an aneurysm, he had a heart attack, he had diabetes, he had like so many different things.
Dementia, yeah.
Yeah. And then at the same time, though, he kept, like you're saying, bouncing back. It was like the Energizer Bunny. It was like, nothing's going to get this guy. And in a way, that's an interesting parallel too with the abuse. It was like, he was it was almost like unstoppable. It was the sense of like, he could be abusive and then kind of quick fix, make it up, apologize, be really sweet and kind, and then do it again. But it's like
another kind of cycle.
Yeah, another cycle. And also the cycle of vulnerability coupled with this omnipotence. And that was present when he was ill also, where it was like he was totally vulnerable. And there was a time in 2006, I think it was, where, I really thought he was going to die. Like there was no doubt, it just felt like this is imminent now. And he was hallucinating and all these other things. He didn't die for 6 more years. It was like, and between in those 6 years, he moved to different nursing homes, basically because of bad behavior. But it's like, it reminds me of those like inflatable dolls or, those inflatable things on lawns where you like.
Outside the car dealership thing. That
like you hit it and it keeps coming back and you hit it and it keeps, it'll keep standing.
It pops back up. Yeah,
exactly. And that was my dad in everything.
And you say like nothing could really prepare you for that. There was this moment when he falls at the Cleveland airport. You kind of pinpoint this as a turning point for him where things seemed to be in relatively good health, but he fell and broke his hip. And you were kind of involved in that trip too. So you carried these feelings about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you were worried he was about to die then and you weren't ready.
No.
But then again, you were less prepared for what ended up happening, which was years of this cycle of health crises and then recoveries, and that nothing could have prepared you for that.
And the reality is like, you're never ready. It's almost like you can know it's happening. Like he was never going to get better. But I also didn't think he was going to die 3 days before I started my new job in South Carolina, 3 weeks after I moved here, after just being divorced myself. Like I didn't really, I was like, wow, that was interesting timing, Dad.
Right.
But what I was going to say about what you just said something that was really interesting. And it reminds me of even just with the passage I read from the being in the nursing home, and it really relates to the moment he fell. So when my dad fell at the airport, he was going there in a limo kind of thing, being dropped off, got out of the car and fell on ice in Cleveland at the airport. And my friend who's now, he's my ex-husband, Mark, he and I were heading to Cleveland to meet my dad to then go to Florida. And
with him. Yeah.
Yeah, with him. And it was supposed to be this vacation. And my dad had packed he had a red suitcase And it turns out that red suitcase, which is also featured in the book, is that thing was like screaming at me every time I would go and visit him in a nursing home. I don't know why I didn't just think to trash it. Maybe because I kept hoping we would get to pack it and he could go home. But like, honestly, that suitcase was it was like a bully. You know, it was this sense of like, oh my gosh, like it was taunting because it was, I mean, I felt, and I still kind of do, but I'm, like if my dad wasn't taking us to Florida, he wouldn't have fallen on ice at the airport and he wouldn't have broken his hip. And then he his whole life wouldn't have come tumbling down with it. Now, at the same time, though,
butterfly effect moment, right?
Yeah. But at the same time, that's like sort of abuse survivor logic, which is that if I hadn't have done
putting
this,
it on you, right?
Yeah. Like if I hadn't done this, he wouldn't have done that to me. Or if I had done this, he definitely would have behaved differently. And then I wouldn't have been told like, I wish you'd commit suicide or something.
Right.
So it's really, really interesting how even in a moment like that has really nothing to do with abuse, the psyche that's been dealing with abuse and those dynamics is still kind of contaminated by that. So that there was still that sense of, God, if only we hadn't have gone to Florida, like if only we hadn't have made that trip. I mean, and the reality is I was actually very tentative about wanting to go on that trip. My dad really, really wanted this for us. And he really wanted to, the three of us to go and to have this wonderful time and to be at this resort. And I was haunted by some of my memories of my dad on trips. And I didn't want to deal with that with my husband at the time. And then I also dealt with the guilt and the shame around not really wanting the trip. And then he actually, like, his whole life tumbled down as a result of a trip that he really wanted that I didn't really want because I wasn't grateful enough. So it did this whole thing, I mean, I can still feel it.
Yeah. And it recurs. You bring it up throughout the book.
Yes.
This Cleveland airport is this recurring moment that you keep going back to.
Yeah. And then, I mean, isn't it wild that he wound up, I got the news of his death at a different airport, as I was about to board a plane to go and see him for the last time, which at that time, really, I knew was the last time because they called me to pretty much tell me that. Like, I mean, earlier in the day. And so I arranged to leave that evening and then missed it. It was like, again, like, at the time it was like, oh my God, you're such a screw up. Like, you can't even like get to see him when it was just this, the reflex of criticism,
self-blame. Yeah.
Yeah. All of the blame that, like I had internalized that so much. And so it was just a process to try to realize like, no, my dad could have fallen anywhere. Like that could have happened. Something else would have happened. Because of course something else would have happened, but it was so hard to see in that moment.
This reminds me the ways that you're very confessional and vulnerable yourself in the book. This isn't a book about Deborah Cohan, the hero who cared for her dying father. This is a book of Deborah Cohan who's wrestling with the ambiguity of being someone who experienced abuse, has really hard feelings about that, and also has feelings of love. But there was, I think, one of the most arresting, probably, I shouldn't qualify this. I think to me, the most arresting moment in the book is when you're listing all the medications that he's taking in any given day when he's in a care facility. There's Ambien, glucotrol, amoxicillin, Actos, Mysoline, and even more. And you see this pharmacy bill that added up, a monthly pharmacy bill that added up to $1,200. And then you add this startling line. You say one extra little something slipped into this whole mess would be untraceable. This is, one of the darkest thoughts I think that a caregiver might experience. But you're not the only caregiver who I've heard talk about this. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time there about what it was like kind of confessing that, talking about that in your book.
Yeah, I certainly, I hope it's understood. I think it is actually in the book, understood that it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't like, because of that moment when my dad thought his life would be easier if I committed suicide, that, I want to somehow poison him or kill him. It was just this very deep in my bones feeling of no one should have to live this way. And
it was, you were witnessing suffering.
Yeah.
And your brain was like, what can we do to
stop it? Yeah. And it was, And also, I mean, my parents, as I said, and you identified it as well, is that they're very progressive. And I still remember conversations when I was growing up where, my dad would say, like, if that ends up happening to me, like, he would talk about people who,
right.
Yeah, I don't want to live like that. Just
right.
Kill me, do something. So I think even he would have been compassionate and understanding to the thought I had. What's also interesting that you didn't reveal in your question, though, is when I revealed it to myself, I was also telling it to my husband at the time, and who thought I was just totally crazy for thinking it, for saying it. It was almost like I should be ashamed of myself. And then there I go retelling the whole thing in the book. So I really never wound up being so ashamed of it. It was just more the sense of, the absolute desperation that a caregiver feels, the absolute helplessness to stop the suffering and to stop witnessing it too. It was just like, how much longer can we all go on like this? This is just, it was sort of like, this is an untenable situation.
Yeah, this wasn't a revenge plot. This was
absolutely not
a desperate moment of trying to figure out how to make the suffering end. And I mean, you talk about how caregiving amplified your child instincts, your hyper responsibility and hyper vigilance, and what toll that could take on you over a number of years. What was it like being hyper vigilant, hyper responsible about your father?
Well, you almost alluded to it in the list of the medications, where, it was like I was carrying around like a file box in my car with all sorts of information about his health, with all sorts of papers, with duplicate copies of things. Because it was like, I don't want to be caught off guard, not prepared. If someone calls me, I want to have it all ready. I, always had like pen and paper with me. Yeah, it's true that there's a hypervigilance that happens when someone's experiencing an abusive relationship or witnessing abuse. That sense of like being on guard, of trying to like have every base covered, that sort of thing.
Be blameless, really.
Yeah. And I did that. Right. I extended that into the caregiving. It was like, I made a list of that it was sort of crazy. I sent a copy to my mother. I sent a copy to the nursing home. I sent everywhere. It was like this. And actually it was when he lived at home, where before that, where I had said, it was like something on the refrigerator that said like his social security number, his, like all of his information, like the drugs he takes, his health history, the dates of surgeries, so that anybody, like, any of the nurses caring for him in his home could see that, could know what was going on, could assist.
And you were also just on call all the time, like expecting any phone call. Like it seemed like you were just tied to your phone in case there was a phone call that would come in.
Yeah, right. And then when he died, I talked about how that night after talking with my friend for hours on my couch afterwards, then I just go and I turn off the phone. And I've done that every single night since. I never leave my phone on. Ever
from that point on. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, could call me at 3 or 4 in the morning. I mean, if I'm up, I'll answer. If I'm not, it's like, it was just this sense of, it could be called at any moment about anything. And there was just no boundaries on it, because again, it's just the sense of, they have to for different, liability reasons. But then I was just being called about anything and everything.
It took up mental and emotional space 24 hours a day. And as you watched all these losses pile up, he stopped being able to drive. He stopped being able to walk. He stopped being able to write, then read, then feed himself. Then he lost control of his bladder. He couldn't think straight. He couldn't remember. The dementia took over. And you've got this friend, Julie, that you talk about. She's a geriatric care specialist. And you said she's actually not comfortable when she hears people talking about a role reversal in this situation. It's common for people to say the child becomes the parent and the parent becomes like the child. I mean, you're doing a lot of the same things. They're helping feed them. They probably wear diapers. There's all these things going on. You say that Julie she's not comfortable with that comparison, but you kind of disagree with her. So I wanted to hear your thoughts about like where Julie's coming from and how you see it.
Well, I mean, she was so compassionate to me about my dad and about all that has happened. And in fact, I remember saying to her, I'm going to be using your name. If you don't want me to use it, I can give you a pseudonym. I mean, I don't want to
It's the risk of being friends with a writer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but nobody's really talked about just in a singularly bad way in the book. I mean, not even my dad, right? So, and with Julie, it's like, I think that's just a common thing in gerontology and in her field is the sense of empowering the person who is being cared for and,
conferring dignity, right?
Yeah,
like treating someone with
exactly.
dignity. I feel like they say, like, if you say they're like children, that's undignified or that's, demeaning or.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, that's why these nursing homes will often they'll ask families, to post pictures of when the person was younger and more robust and vibrant and, on the door or in the entrance to the room so that when people are going in to see the patient, they're also reminded, oh, this is really who I'm seeing. I'm not just seeing this person who's only weak and sick and vulnerable. But what's interesting to me about that is that I felt that a lot with my father. I felt like I wanted to just like scream to the anybody who would listen or, any of the nurses or anyone, this isn't really my dad. This is my dad, and like kind of asserting the strengths and the brilliance that he did have. And then at the same time, though, it was very hard for me to give that credit to other people, and so when I would see, other residents who were really bad off, I had a hard time thinking about them in their prior phases of their life. I think that's just something that caregivers struggle with. I mean, I certainly wasn't unique in that.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to Julie in the sense of like conferring dignity and being mindful of this person as a person worthy of concern and care and not infantilizing people. But you also say, look, like when you're feeding your dad and he's spitting up down his shirt and all these things that you can't help but feel like that role has been reversed. And so at least I'd like to find a way to both dignify and honor the parent and also validate and recognize the experience of the child who is now being a caregiver. And I think both of those things are possible. But
well, that's why I think I say, and when I talk about feeding my dad birthday cake, and there's this point where I talk about it as like a terrible beauty in feeding a parent. And that kind of gets at that to me, again, the ambivalence, the contradictory reality, the sense that we should be there, in a certain way. Yeah, like they did this for us. We should do this for them with no sense of negativity. And at the same time, this isn't really how it was supposed to go.
And there's no rehearsal for it too, for you. You were just there. The cupcake was there and here you are, you're feeding your dad.
And he wouldn't have wanted that. I mean, the last thing he would have wanted was to have me feed him. I mean, oh my gosh.
There's one more excerpt I'd like to hear you read here. You wrote some of this book in your dad's presence there at the nursing home when he would be asleep and you were at his side. And this is on page 142. And you wrote to him in that moment in 2009. If you could read what you wrote.
It's just funny. Only I'm laughing only because I feel like I have that page memorized. It's like, because I've actually read this piece quite a bit when I've spoken about the book, and it does feel like a really evocative passage, and not because it really talks about his abuse at all, but because of the writerly technique that I used in it of taking, it's almost like field notes that I wound up, it's exactly the same. I didn't change anything. I mean, but I didn't know I was writing a book at that moment either. Yeah. I watch you as you sleep, not unlike you probably watched me as I slept, as a newborn baby and as a young girl, in wonder, in awe, in calm, and in worry. A parent watches a child sleep with anticipation of a future. An adult child watches a sick parent sleep with a sense of the past. You are finally still and quiet. You, a man who I know is chaotic and loud. We rest in this calm as you fall in and out of slumber, and I grade papers. I need to study your face, memorize it, as I know I'll need it one day. Yet the you now is not the you I want to remember. In a few days, I'll be back with over 100 students, giving lectures, attending meetings, going to a concert, a lunch with a friend, a performance of the vagina monologues. And in my week ahead, I worry about being too busy, about running from one activity to the next, breathless. Yet one day, Daddy, you did this too, right? How would you restructure those days now? What did you hope for? What do you hope for now? You look tired, though I can't tell if you're tired of this life. Yesterday, I brought you coffee from Caribou with one of their napkins that made a jab at Starbucks that said, "Our coffee is smooth and fresh because burnt and bitter were already taken." Whenever I see great lines and logos, I think of you. Your creativity still shines through as we leaf through Metropolitan Home and marvel at minimalist spaces. Your stained maroon sweatpants are pulled up halfway toward your chest, and your stomach looks distended. Earlier today, I saw as you put imaginary pills to your mouth with your fingers, something I assumed to be a self-soothing ritual you performed after the nurse told you it was not yet time for more medication. Being in Cleveland, I'm surrounded by childhood friends hanging out with their dads, younger men than you, in their 60s and early 70s, robust, athletic, energetic men, vigorously playing tennis and golf, working, traveling, and chasing after their dreams, not figments of their imaginations in thin air. Oh, Daddy. Your eyes open suddenly and you ask, "What are you writing?" I quickly respond, "Oh, nothing, really. It's just for school."
That's Deborah Cohan, professor of sociology at the University of South Carolina-Beaufort. She earned her PhD in sociology and a joint Master of Arts in Women's Studies and Sociology at Brandeis University. That excerpt is from her book, Welcome to Wherever We Are, a memoir of family, caregiving, and redemption. You mentioned a little bit about this already, Deborah, but maybe just take one moment and talk about the ways that your father maybe tried to reckon with the abusive dynamics of your relationship later in life. If there was any indication that he came to regret how he treated you. And you talk about, for example, when he tried to volunteer at a domestic violence clinic. And even in that context, it didn't really come up. It doesn't sound like you had many opportunities or that you felt safe enough or whatever to straightforwardly confront him and say, this was an abusive situation.
I certainly tried. I mean, there was a time when I was doing the abuse intervention work and I was working really late into the night, and our groups ran from even 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. after, men had worked their jobs and then came to this program. And then I was leaving Cambridge. This is, when I was in Boston, and leaving late at night, 10:30, 11 o'clock, and, walking to a parking lot by myself and driving home. And I remember this one day that my dad and I were on the phone. He was just so concerned for my safety. It really upset him that I was doing this and doing it late. And I did in that moment say, I really tried to question his fear and to try to help him understand, though it didn't really work, but to really try to say, Dad, the things that these guys do are no different than things that you've done. And I'm really not afraid of them. Actually, that was not really an issue for me. I guess he just didn't want to also see me driving around really late at night. But the reality is that had I been really afraid, I wouldn't have been an effective counselor for these guys either. And so, I had to try to help my dad understand that I was working with them in as fearless and compassionate a way as possible. But that, I guess in that moment, I also felt sort of fearless and compassionate in the conversation with him of kind of trying to say Dad, you're labeling these guys as monsters, as, demons. And actually your behavior is on a continuum with theirs. And that's disturbing, to hear from your daughter, obviously. Mm-hmm. But it was important for me to say. So I'm really glad I had a moment to tell him that. It didn't lead to a very productive conversation because he, like many men in the program, still wanted to minimize aspects of their behavior or rationalize it. Or it was like this, but Deb, I never hit you. Deb, I never did this. I never did that. That would be horrifying. But what I did wasn't as bad. And I really didn't let him get away with that, and that's another reason why, for me, writing this book was critical, because there really is not enough out there to highlight the damage of like verbal and emotional psychological abuse and threats. There's so much out there around physical abuse and also sexual abuse, movies and books and things like that. And those are really important cultural documents that we have in the world. But the thing that also has happened is that people don't understand enough about the damage of the emotional abuse and the verbal abuse, and as a result, with so much less written about it, I really felt this, I will say I felt a really tremendous ethical responsibility to write the book.
And you talk about how much your dad is still with you. You close the book by saying that you see him in so much of life. And I wondered, what's an example of that, and whether you think that fades over time at all? No,
I don't think any of this fades. I definitely don't think that time heals everything or any of that stuff that people say. No, I do. I see him in so much, in the past, well, I guess it's probably the past 6 years or so, I have gotten much more involved as a public sociologist, translating ideas and concepts and theories and things for the larger public. So getting quoted in major news outlets and doing a lot of writing and things like that. And that's probably the part where I so miss my father, because he would get such a tremendous kick out of the fact that I, wrote for Teen Vogue, or that I, was quoted in Time Magazine, or, I wrote a piece for Newsweek recently. I mean, that was his bread and butter. That's what he loved. And he would have loved that I was on this podcast. He would probably be really angry and humiliated about some of what I'd be talking about. But he definitely had this sort of overwhelming pride and interest in my accomplishments. And that has been a really hard thing to deal with, because my career really took off since I've lived here. And that's when he died. So, right. And he always dreamed of living in the Carolinas or in New Mexico or Arizona. And so sometimes I feel like I'm, in a sense, it's like it might be sort of living out something that he really wanted that he didn't actualize. So, I mean, I think he would be, pretty over the moon about the fact that I moved to South Carolina and have made a good life for myself here. And, I'm a lot happier as a person than I ever was before. Some of that is probably, it's healing from abuse. It's being in a new relationship. It's so many different things. I wish he could know me now. I wish I could talk to him and know him now. It's just such a strange thing, but I do feel like, hopefully somehow he knows. Yeah. So, I mean, I had him for a long time. I'm partnered with a man whose his dad died when he was 10 years old. And I think I'm often thinking to myself, man, I wish he knew Mike. I mean, he really missed out. He really, really missed out. And Mike missed out knowing his father. And I didn't have that. But instead, I had this very torturous, it was a very complicated relationship that, it's tricky. But I mean, it's interesting because the conversations I grew up having with my dad that were really fun and really provocative and helpful to me were often conversations around advertising and marketing and all that kind of stuff. And funny enough, my partner, Mike, that's really his thing. I mean, he's the director of media relations. So here I am still having these conversations at dinner. It's a little bit bizarre, but
in some ways that circle continues to close. All right.
Exactly.
Well, Deborah, let's conclude with the segment Regrets, Challenges, and Surprises. This is when you can talk about anything that you regret about the book now that it's out, what the most challenging thing about writing it was, or what kind of surprises you encountered as you created this book. You can speak to one, two, or all three of those things: regrets, challenges, and surprises.
I would say that I really don't have any regrets, which I'm so pleased about because of the nature of the topic and the fact that surviving abuse and dealing with caregiving are riddled with regrets. The fact that I could write a book and not have regrets about it is pretty remarkable to me. You
didn't even find any typos or anything like that?
There might be. I don't know, but I'm kind of...
I didn't notice any.
I'm crazy about that kind of stuff, though. And my dad was, too. Oh, my gosh. He was I inherited my like spelling and all that craziness from him.
How funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't notice any. So no regrets. All right. Well,
no, I really don't. I mean, I don't have any regrets. I don't feel like there's anything that I revealed in the book that I wish I hadn't revealed. There's nothing that I wish I had included that I didn't include, that kind of thing, which feels really good to me. Yeah, I mean, I actually have been thinking about this a lot as I've been writing, this new book that I'm working on, because it's that sense of, you just really don't want to forget something. You don't want to, you want to make sure that whatever you wanted to say is in it. And so
once it's out, it's out.
It's out. Yeah. And at the same time, though, I've started to grow more comfortable with the fact that writing itself is a process, and that I will come to think about things and know things in new and different ways. Mm-hmm. And I guess when you ask what's surprising, I will say that it has surprised me that the thing I was most afraid of, which was the death of a parent or both parents, has been also freeing. It's been a pretty startling revelation, I guess you could say.
Is it hard to talk about that? Like, some people might say, oh, this is a person who's glad their parents died. If you talk about that as a freeing moment.
Yeah, no, I don't really mean it like that, because I wish they were still around. It's really not I'm glad they died. It's their deaths have liberated me to be more authentically me in a way that I guess I felt I needed to be.
You're not trying to close the triangle anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's freed that. You talk about that dynamic going on your whole life. You were trying to kind of hold that together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember reading this book called The End of Eve by Ariel Gore. And the last line is something like, I was once someone's daughter, but now I am free. And I remember when I read that, I just bristled. I was like, oh gosh, like it just, it felt revolting in a way to me. It was like this sense of, it felt mean and all these things. Mm-hmm. And now I really get it. I really understand that, like that there's some ways in which that role can be confining and restrictive and that sort of thing. And that I remember reading that. And then also I remember going to my book launch in Cleveland for this Welcome to Wherever We Are book. And the adult daughter of one of my mother's best friends was there. And we were talking about, our mothers and this beautiful friendship that they had. And then she had some issues with her mom, and she had said, I miss her so much, and it's so freeing that she's gone. Mm. And again, it was like that sense of, that's a little surprising. And then I've just kind of meditated on that all along. I just sort of see it in a new way, and that has surprised me. It's
another example of how both things can be true. I mean, your love for your parents is clear in the book, and there's also a sense of freedom and an ability to kind of let go a little bit and live more into yourself in your new partnership and your work. So speaking of which, what's the new book that you're working on?
It's actually a memoir related to my mom. Yeah.
To be fair, you got to get both.
Yeah, you got to do both, right? Well, and that's going to be an interesting one in many ways for like similar and different reasons, but it's more related to art and art making. My mom was a fabulous painter and printmaker, and I really now come to see how much growing up with creative parents totally changed me. Like it made me, it changed me. And maybe that's part of what's freeing, but it's part of what I miss is I wish that now I could have those conversations with them about my own creativity. And my mom's death in 2020 was right height of the pandemic, September of 2020. And my second parent, who I didn't get to go and see when she died, it was like, okay.
Wow.
Yeah, but hers is different. I wasn't involved in her care. She wanted me to have like nothing to do with it. So it's almost as though she took what she believed were my feelings about my dad, that it was a lot to deal with, and she just kind of closed me out. So that was really difficult. But actually, I was incredibly scared of like, how am I going to deal with all of her art? Just thousands of paintings. Like I just thought it would be overwhelming, and it would be tremendously sad to be surrounded by so much of her work. And it has actually been a complete opposite. It has been like super, super helpful and healing. And had me think so much around creativity and what's involved in the creative process. So, so that's kind of brewing in the background as well.
I really look forward to that. That seems like not really a sequel, but definitely another part of the story. And based on Welcome to Wherever We Are, that's a book that I want to read. So Deborah, thanks so much for spending time with us at Family Proclamations and talking about this book.
Thank you so much for having me and for all of your thoughtful questions. It meant a lot.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Camille Messick, my wonderful transcript editor, and thanks to David Osler, who sponsored this first group of transcripts. If you'd like to sponsor transcripts, please reach out. Let me know. My email address is blair@firesidepod.org. You can also contact me with questions or feedback about any episode. There's a lot more to come, so why not take a second to rate and review the show and let me know what you think about it so far. Like this review from Benjamin E. Park. He said, if you like engaging conversations with smart people on pressing issues, this is your show. I love that review. Thank you so much. Also, check this out. The number one way that people hear about podcasts is through a friend. Word of mouth, that's how it happens. So think of somebody right now. That's the person you're going to tell. I appreciate every recommendation. Thanks to Mates of State for providing our theme song. Relationscapes is part of the Dialogue Podcast Network. I'm Blair Hodges, and I'll see you next time.